What if your quiet town wasn't as peaceful as it seemed? What if the flickering lights in the night sky weren't planes or stars, but something watching you? In Lights in the Sky, Ellie Morgan stumbles upon a terrifying truth buried beneath her sleepy hometown, vanishing neighbors, silent woods, a glowing object that shouldn't exist. As the sky pulses with strange lights and people begin to disappear, Ellie discovers Pine Hollow is part of something far larger and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. She's seen too much, and they know it. You'll never look at the night sky the same again. Welcome to Pine Hollow, a town tucked deep in the woods where everything seems normal. Too normal. Meet Ellie Morgan, a quiet woman who thought moving to this small town would mean peace and a fresh start. But when glowing orbs begin to flicker above the trees and her neighbors start vanishing without a trace, Ellie is thrust into a mystery that defies logic, science, and reality itself. In Lights in the Sky, Unexplained UFOs, you'll follow Ellie's chilling journey through a town being slowly erased by something otherworldly. First, it's just lights, then silence, then people. Gone. And no one in town will talk about it. Not the sheriff, not the mayor, and not the neighbors who pretend everything's just fine. But Ellie knows what she saw, and she won't stop until she finds out what's lurking above her and beneath her feet. As she digs deeper, she uncovers a buried network of tunnels, a machine that seems to breathe, and an ancient intelligence that has been watching Pine Hollow for generations. She wasn't meant to discover this, but she did, and now she's marked. This story is filled with creeping tension, eerie discoveries, and a final encounter that will leave your skin crawling. So grab your headphones, dim the lights, and get ready, because the truth is no longer out there. It's already here. Ellie Morgan always thought she'd live in the city forever. That had been the plan. Coffee shops on every corner, the hum of late-night traffic outside her window, and the thrill of a place that never really slept. But life had a way of unraveling quietly, like thread pulled loose from a sweater. After the layoff, the breakup, and a string of nights she couldn't sleep without hearing sirens, Ellie packed her life into 2 suitcases and moved to Pine Hollow. Pine Hollow was the kind of place you could miss if you blinked while driving past. Tucked between miles of unmarked woods and winding back roads, the town had one gas station, a post office, and a diner that served pie no one could stop talking about. It had quiet streets, friendly smiles, and porches with rocking chairs that creaked when the wind blew through. It felt like a good place to start over. At first, Ellie loved the stillness, the way the fog rolled in every morning like a soft blanket, the rustle of trees whispering secrets as the sun dipped behind the hills. Her little house on Cedar Lane had ivy curling up the porch railings, a backyard that backed right up to the woods, and enough space for her to plant tomatoes and lavender in the spring. It was a life she hadn't imagined, but it felt peaceful. Until the silence started to feel wrong. It began subtly. The birds, once loud and cheerful at sunrise, stopped singing. Ellie noticed it on a Tuesday. She had made her coffee and stepped outside to enjoy the early light, but the usual chirps and flutters were missing. Just the wind. And even that felt muted, like the world was holding its breath. Then came the nights. Ellie would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and feel something pressing against the quiet. Something not quite there, but not gone either, like a hum just beneath the sound of silence. She chalked it up to moving stress, maybe loneliness, maybe even the strange acoustics of an old house. But then the disappearances started. It was small things at first. The paper boy stopped delivering. Mrs. Whitaker's mail began piling up in her box. A stray dog that used to roam near the market vanished without a trace. Ellie asked around. Most neighbors just shrugged. Probably moved on, they said. Nothing to worry about. But worry had already settled in Ellie's chest like a stone. One morning, she walked to the diner to grab breakfast and noticed the help wanted sign in the window. Strange, she thought. Carol, the waitress, had been working there for years. When she asked the cook, he frowned and mumbled something about Carol taking some time off. But he wouldn't meet her eyes when he said it. Later that week, the Miller family's house stood dark. Ellie had just seen them at the farmer's market. 2 kids, a golden retriever, cheerful parents. Now the porch light was off, the windows were shuttered, and no one answered the door. And no one seemed to think it was odd. The strangest thing was how normal everyone pretended to be. The mayor smiled too brightly at town meetings. The librarian kept her usual hours. The gas station clerk whistled while stacking candy bars, but something behind his eyes looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. It was as if the whole town knew something unspoken, something heavy, and they had all agreed to carry it in silence. Ellie tried to talk to people, asked gentle questions. "Have you noticed anything weird lately? Did the Millers say goodbye?" But she got the same polite nods, the same dismissive laughs. People didn't want to talk, or maybe they couldn't. One evening, just before sunset, Ellie knocked on Mrs. Whitaker's door. The older woman lived 2 houses down and had always been kind, always waving from her porch, always ready to share lemon cookies. But today, there was no answer. Ellie knocked again. The door was slightly ajar. She hesitated, then pushed it open a few inches. "Mrs. Whitaker," she called softly. No response. Inside, the house looked untouched. A cup of tea sat cold on the counter. A half-finished puzzle on the kitchen table. Everything exactly as it should be, except for the eerie stillness that clung to the air like dust. Ellie moved to the living room window and saw Gus, Mrs. Whitaker's old gray cat, pacing along the windowsill, tail flicking. He meowed loudly, his eyes fixated on something outside in the trees. But when Ellie looked, there was nothing there, just the woods, dark, motionless. She backed out of the house, locking the door behind her, and tried to shake the chill that had crept up her spine. Something was wrong in Pine Hollow. It wasn't just the vanishing people or the silent animals. It was deeper. A feeling, like the town itself was waiting for something, or maybe hiding from it. As she walked home, the wind picked up, rustling, the leaves in low, uneasy whispers, and for just a moment, Ellie swore she saw a flicker in the sky, just beyond the tree line. A light, there, then gone. It happened again on a Wednesday night, the kind of night when the air feels too still, too perfect, like the world has paused, holding something back. The moon hung low and bloated above the hills, casting pale light over Pine Hollow, but Ellie barely noticed it. She was too focused on the darkness just beyond the edge of her backyard. She sat on the porch wrapped in a wool blanket, a mug of tea cooling beside her. Her journal was open in her lap, the last entry half written, the pen ink slightly smeared by her thumb. Something is wrong here. Not just strange, not just off, wrong. She tapped the pen against her knee, her eyes drifting to the tree line. In the distance, the forest swayed gently, but there was no wind, no breeze, no sound, not even crickets, not even the owls that used to call out around this hour. Only silence. Then, at exactly 9:03 p.m., the sky blinked, not lightning, not stars. A flicker, sharp, artificial, unnatural. Ellie froze. It happened again, just a second long like a camera flash somewhere in the upper atmosphere, and then again in a different part of the sky, closer now. 5 circular lights, faint and distant, suddenly shimmered into view, like reflections on the surface of a pond. They weren't steady. They pulsed, each at a different rhythm. Red, white, blue, and then a yellow so pale it looked silver. No sound, no motion, just hovering. Ellie's breath caught. Her heartbeat drummed in her ears. She fumbled for her phone, fingers trembling as she opened the camera. The lens focused. The lights were there, so clear, so surreal. She hit record and watched the screen. Black. The display showed nothing. Just static, no sky, no trees, no lights, like the camera didn't want to see. A low vibration stirred in the ground beneath her feet, subtle, like a distant engine purring underground. The tea on the table rippled. The pen rolled off her journal and hit the wooden floor with a soft click. The lights began to move. Not like planes, not even like birds. No curve or arc to their motion. They snapped from one point to another, blinking in and out of space like they were skipping through reality. One shot upward and vanished. Another sank lower, skimming the tops of the trees. Ellie stood up, drawn forward like a moth to a flame. She moved off the porch and into the grass, cold dew soaking through her socks. The lights pulsed again, slower, this time almost deliberate. One broke away from the others and hovered just above the treetops. It tilted slightly, as if watching her, and then, in a blink, everything went dark. No lights, no hum, just the thick, crushing silence of the woods. Ellie's skin prickled, her eyes strained in the darkness. She wasn't sure how long she stood there. Seconds? Minutes? It was impossible to tell. Then she heard it, a soft rustle from the trees. One movement. Precise. Not like an animal, like something choosing to make itself known. She turned back toward the house, heart pounding, and walked quickly up the steps, slamming the door shut behind her. She locked it, bolted it, and even dragged a chair in front of it without thinking. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone, replaying the footage. Nothing. Just black screen and a burst of static, like something had interfered with the recording itself. She sat on the couch, still in her blanket, eyes wide, mind racing. Was it a dream? A trick of the light? Some kind of electrical phenomenon? Her rational brain screamed for explanations, but deep down, Ellie already knew. This was real, and whatever it was, it had seen her. She turned off every light in the house, crept upstairs, and peered out the bedroom window toward the forest. The trees swayed again, slow and unnatural, though the wind was still absent. She tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Every car passing in the distance felt like a threat. She kept thinking about the lights, how they hovered, how they moved, how they seemed to focus on her and only her. Somewhere around 3 a.m., she finally drifted off, curled up in a tight ball with the blanket clutched to her chest. But even in sleep, she wasn't safe. Because that night, Ellie dreamed of floating, of silence, and of something speaking to her. Not with words, but with images. Stars, fire, a spiral of lights turning slowly above a dark world, and in the center of it all, a town that looked very much like Pine Hollow, but emptied, hollow, still. She woke before dawn, her cheeks wet with tears and her fingers clenched so tightly around the blanket that her knuckles were white. There was no going back to normal, not after that sky, not after that flicker. The next morning, Ellie woke to a faint knocking sound, not on her front door, not on the windows. It was inside the house, soft, irregular taps, like something shifting in the walls or crawling through the ceiling. She held her breath, listening. Nothing, just the morning sun filtering through half-drawn curtains, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. The knocking didn't return, but the unease lingered, sticky and persistent, like the echo of a voice you thought you imagined. Ellie moved through the house with slow, measured steps. Her coffee remained untouched. Her phone still showed a blank recording from the night before, and outside the sky was clear and empty, no trace of what she had seen. But she knew what she'd witnessed wasn't a dream. The flickering lights, the static, the impossible silence. It was real. And now, her quiet little town felt like a stage set, perfectly arranged but hollow on the inside. She didn't know what she was searching for as she walked the creaky floorboards of her house, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden, waiting to be found. She ended up in the hallway outside the spare bedroom. The attic. Door. It was one of those old pull-down hatches with a wooden ladder that creaked as it unfolded. She had never been up there. Never needed to. The realtor said it was just insulation and cobwebs. But something about today felt different. Ellie climbed up slowly, one rung at a time. The air grew colder as she rose, dry and stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. She reached the top and stepped into the darkness. Her flashlight beam cut through the dust and shadows. Old trunks, a few broken chairs, boxes labeled with the names of strangers, maybe previous owners. The insulation was peeling in one corner. A single window, clouded and cracked, let in just enough light to give the attic a gray, haunted glow. She crouched near one of the boxes and lifted the lid. Newspapers. Old ones. Headlines from decades ago. Strange lights reported in woods. 2 more missing in Hollow Ridge. No comment from local authorities. Ellie's pulse quickened. She flipped through article after article. Different names, different dates, but the same strange pattern. Flickering lights, disappearances, no explanations. And then she saw it. Folded neatly beneath a stack of yellowed clippings was a piece of thick, dark paper, almost like parchment. She unfolded it carefully. It was a map, hand-drawn, the ink slightly faded but still legible. Pine Hollow was at the center, its streets drawn in perfect detail. But surrounding the town were red markings, X's, circles, lines tracing through the woods like veins. Some areas were shaded in gray, others outlined in blue. One large X was marked just beyond the edge of Cedar Lane, in the forest behind her. Home. Ellie ran her finger over the spot. She had walked those trails 100 times. There was nothing there. Or so she thought. In the corner of the map, scrawled in tiny, slanted handwriting, was a note. Landing sites. Observed activity. Pattern unchanged. Do not follow alone. She stared at the words for a long time. Her. Mind spinning. Who had drawn this? Why was it hidden? What did observed activity even mean? A noise behind her made her jump. The attic ladder creaked and footsteps echoed below. "Hello," she called out. No response. She pointed the flashlight toward the opening, but the hallway below was empty. And then a face appeared. Not frightening, just a boy, 16, maybe 17, standing there, looking up at her like he'd just stumbled onto something important. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said quickly. "I saw your lights last night from the woods. You saw them too, didn't you?" Ellie stared at him. "Who are you?" "Ben," he said. "I live over on Maple Drive. At least, I did. My parents left a week ago. Said it was for vacation. But they never came back." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. A folded paper. Another map. Almost identical to hers, but updated. Annotated in a rushed, frantic script. He handed it to her. "I think they're coming back. The lights. They've been following the same pattern every night. And last time." He paused, glancing behind him as if someone might be listening. "I followed them. I went into the woods. There's something out there." Ellie's heart pounded in her chest. "What did you see?" Ben swallowed hard. A clearing, burned ground, and a machine. Not like a car or anything human. It was smooth, black, humming like it was alive. Ellie felt the map trembling in her hand. "There's something buried out there," Ben continued. "Something old. Something that's been watching this town for a long time." She looked back down at the attic map, then at Ben, and felt the weight of something larger than herself settling over her like a shadow. This wasn't just flickering lights or missing neighbors. This was a secret buried deep in the roots of pine. Hollow. Something people had tried to forget. Something the woods had been hiding for decades. And now, it was waking up again. The forest didn't look different that night. That was the unsettling part. Even after everything, the silence, the lights, the dreams, Ellie expected the woods behind her house to wear some new face, to give some clue that it held a secret. But the trees stood tall and patient, their twisted limbs reaching toward the dusk like skeletal arms, unmoved by human eyes. It was just past 8 p.m. when Ellie zipped up her coat and met Ben at the edge of her yard. He carried a backpack, worn and dirt-smudged, stuffed with flashlights, a film camera, a compass, a hunting knife, and 2 peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in foil. Ellie brought an old Polaroid, a field notebook, and the original attic map, now covered in notes and question marks. They didn't speak much at first. The trail behind Ellie's house had grown wild with time, swallowed by thickets and dead leaves. Branches clawed at their jackets as they moved deeper, the path narrowing, until it felt more like a tunnel than a trail. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to absorb the sound of their footsteps. "You sure you remember the way?" Ellie asked, glancing back at the map. Her voice sounded oddly muted, like the trees themselves were muffling it. Ben nodded, eyes forward. "I marked the trees on the way out," he said, pointing to faint strips of torn red cloth tied around low-hanging branches. "But last time, they didn't stay marked, like something didn't want me coming back." Ellie didn't ask what he meant. She believed him. After what she'd seen, it wasn't hard to believe anything anymore. They moved slowly, deliberately. The moon hadn't risen yet, and their flashlights created more shadows than clarity. Every sound seemed amplified. The distant rustle of something, moving just beyond view, the crunch of frost beneath their boots, the occasional cracking of twigs, sometimes theirs, sometimes not. As they approached the spot marked with the largest red X on the map, Ben held out a hand to stop her. "We're close," he whispered. Ellie scanned the trees. For a moment, all seemed still. Then she saw it. Just ahead, the forest opened into a small clearing, perfectly circular. No undergrowth, no wildlife. Just scorched, blackened earth and a strange metallic scent in the air, like iron and ozone after a thunderstorm. They stepped cautiously into the clearing. The temperature dropped instantly. Ellie felt it in her teeth, in her bones. It wasn't natural cold. It was cold that didn't belong here, cold that came from somewhere else. At the center of the clearing sat something half buried in the earth. A device, sleek, seamless, and unlike anything Ellie had ever seen. It wasn't rusted. It didn't look old. It looked dormant, like it had been waiting. It was roughly the size of a large football, shaped like a teardrop, with strange grooves etched along its surface. Patterns that seemed to shift ever so slightly when she stared at them too long. Ben crouched beside it, reaching out. "Don't," Ellie said quickly. He froze. "Why not?" "I don't know," she admitted, heart thudding. "Just not yet." She took out her Polaroid and snapped a photo. The camera whirred, ejecting the picture. She shook it, held her breath as the image developed, and then stopped. The photo was blank. Not dark, not blurry, just white. Ellie's fingers went cold. "It's like it doesn't want to be seen," she whispered. Ben stood, brushing dirt from his hands. It was humming last time. Now it's quiet, like it shut down, or went into hiding. Ellie knelt by the device. She didn't touch it, but leaned in close. A faint warmth radiated from it. And something else, like a pulse. A slow, rhythmic vibration, too subtle to hear but just strong enough to feel beneath her skin. Suddenly, the clearing lit up, not from above, but from within the trees. Dozens of tiny lights blinked on all around them, like fireflies. But brighter, whiter, steady. They hovered in midair, just above the ground, just beyond the tree line, circling them. Ellie stood slowly. Ben stepped beside her. "They're watching," he murmured. The lights moved, slowly drifting inward. Not aggressively, not hostile, but purposeful, coordinated, intelligent. Ellie didn't run. Neither did Ben. Something told her this was not a moment to flee. This was a test. One of the lights broke away from the others and floated toward her. It stopped about 5 feet away and hovered there, motionless. Ellie raised her hand, palm open. The light pulsed once, then blinked out. Immediately, the others began to vanish too, like candles being snuffed out one by one until the clearing was empty once again. Only the moon remained, rising high above the trees. Ben looked at her, eyes wide. "What just happened?" "I think they wanted to see how we'd react," Ellie said, voice barely above a whisper. "They're studying us." He nodded slowly, but his face was pale. "They're not machines, not just lights. There's something behind them." Ellie turned, back to the object in the ground. "And this, what do you think it is?" Ben hesitated. "Maybe a beacon." The wind picked up then, rustling the trees in a whispering chorus. The air felt heavier, the forest somehow darker than before. Ellie stuffed the useless Polaroid into her jacket and turned to leave. "We need to tell someone," Ben said, falling, into step beside her. Ellie didn't answer right away. Who could they tell? The authorities? The mayor, who smiled too brightly and asked too few questions? The townspeople who had seen the signs but pretended they hadn't? No, not yet, because something was happening in Pine Hollow. Something that had been growing, for years, maybe decades, beneath everyone's noses. And now, it was waking up. As they made their way back through the woods, Ellie looked over her shoulder one last time, and though the clearing was empty, she could feel it. Somewhere just beyond the trees, watching, waiting, and listening. Pine Hollow was changing, not suddenly. Not in any way you could point to and say, "Look, this is different." But in the quiet moments, when the streets were empty, when the wind carried no sound, when you stared too long at the woods, you could feel it, a subtle erosion of normalcy. Ellie woke the morning after the encounter in the woods with a strange ache in her chest. Not pain, just a pressure, like something unfinished. She wandered through her house in a daze, her hands still tingling from where they had hovered near that strange, pulsing device. It had felt alive. Not organic, but aware. She opened her notebook and began jotting down every detail she could remember about the clearing, the object, the lights in the trees. She drew a crude sketch of the hovering orbs, then another of the shifting symbols etched into the device. She didn't know why she was writing it all down. Part of her feared she might forget. Part of her feared she wouldn't. At noon, Ben knocked on her door. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. "They're gone," he said. "Who?" "The Dawsons, and the old guy on Hemlock Street, and Mr. Leone. From the bakery, just gone, all of them, overnight." Ellie's stomach turned. That was 5 people. 5 in less than 24 hours. Ben handed her a piece of paper, a list, names, addresses, dates. There were 15 names on it, people he claimed had vanished since the start of the month. "I started writing them down 2 weeks ago," he said. "At first, I thought it was just random, accidents, people moving. But then I noticed something." He pointed to the far edge of the page. They all lived on the perimeter, every one of them, on the edge of town, closest to the woods. Ellie scanned the list. She knew some of the names. Friendly faces from the market, familiar greetings at the diner, people she hadn't even realized were missing until just now. "They're taking people," Ben said, his voice shaking. "One by one. I think it's the lights, or whatever's behind them." Ellie didn't respond. Her mind was racing, connecting dots in ways she hadn't dared to before. She opened the attic map, laying it across the kitchen table. The red X's, the landing sites, aligned almost perfectly with the addresses on Ben's list. It was like the town was being carved out, piece by piece, and no one was saying a word. Not the sheriff, who still made his rounds with a smile, too forced to be real. Not the local paper, which had grown thinner with each passing week. Not the neighbors who had started keeping their curtains drawn even during the day. Ellie remembered Mrs. Whitaker's journal. She retrieved it from her bookshelf and flipped through the worn pages. Toward the back, she found an entry dated nearly a year ago. "The dreams are worse. I see people floating. Not dead, not quite alive, suspended, waiting. They whisper in, a language I don't understand. Sometimes I wake up and I'm standing at the back door. Sometimes the lights are there, just beyond the trees." Another entry, days later. "They come at night, always at night. They choose the ones who are alone." Ellie closed the journal slowly. The pattern was clear now. The lights weren't just a phenomenon. They were intelligent, intentional. They weren't trying to scare the town. They were selecting from it. And the people they took? They didn't leave behind bags or cars or goodbyes. They simply vanished. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. She kept her lights off, her curtains drawn. She sat by the upstairs window and watched the woods. Her camera was ready, her journal beside her. The air was still, thick with silence. At 9:03 p.m., the lights returned. Not 5 this time. 7. Perfectly spaced, pulsing gently in the sky like the slow, blinking eyes. They moved toward the center of town in complete silence, casting no shadows, yet somehow illuminating everything beneath them in a pale, otherworldly glow. Ellie's phone vibrated. A text from Ben. "They're near the elementary school," she responded. "Meet me there." 10 minutes later, she was parked behind the school's playground. Swings creaked softly in the windless night. The field behind the building stretched out into a wide, grassy flat, usually used for soccer, now eerily empty. Ben was already there, crouched behind the shed, His face was lit by the faint glow of the lights, which now hovered directly above the field. Closer than they'd ever been. Silent. Watching. A figure stood in the center of the grass. Ellie squinted. It was Mr. Leone, the baker. Or, it looked like him, but he wasn't moving. He stood upright, arms at his sides, eyes wide and blank. Not blinking. Frozen. Ellie stepped forward, but Ben grabbed her arm. "Wait," he hissed. "Watch." One of the lights dipped lower, its glow intensifying. It enveloped Mr. Leone in a cone of soft, white light. His body slowly rose from the ground, weightless, silent, as if gravity had released him. He floated 10, 20, 30 feet up. Ellie's breath caught. Then the light blinked out, and Mr. Leone was gone. Vanished into thin air. No sound. No trace. Ben turned to her, his voice hoarse. "They're not abducting us randomly. They're choosing people, for something, and we don't know where they're going." Ellie could barely speak. Her knees were trembling. "We have to stop this," she whispered. Ben looked at her, eyes wide. "How?" Ellie looked down at the map, then at the woods, then at the stars. "I don't know yet, but I think we're running out of time." For the rest of the night, neither Ellie nor Ben spoke. They drove back to her house in silence, hands shaking, eyes wide and hollow. The streets of Pine Hollow looked unchanged, as always. Same mailboxes, same lampposts, same sleepy houses with lights turned off and curtains drawn. But now, Ellie saw it for what it was. A quiet battlefield. A place caught in the grip of something far beyond its borders, something that operated just outside of human understanding. She barely slept. When she did, her dreams were no longer fragmented or strange. They were deliberate, vivid. She saw the clearing again, only now the trees were gone and the sky above was filled with enormous glowing structures that hovered silently like ancient sentinels. She floated weightless above the earth, staring down at a darkened pine hollow below, the town a perfect grid etched into the land, and then a voice, calm, emotionless, but somehow curious. "She is ready." Ellie jolted awake, heart pounding, sweat dampening her collar. The room was still dark, but something had changed. Her window. It was open. She hadn't opened it. She sat up slowly, holding her breath, eyes scanning the shadows. A breeze pushed through the curtains carrying the scent of pine and something metallic. Familiar. Outside, the woods loomed, silent and waiting. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was whatever had whispered to her, in her dream. But she stood, slipped on her coat, grabbed her flashlight and the Polaroid, and stepped barefoot onto the cold grass of her backyard. The night air wrapped around her like a shroud. Above, the stars blinked quietly. No lights, no hum. Not yet. But Ellie felt them watching. She moved past the fence and into the trees, the beam of her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the dark. The forest was quiet, but not dead. The silence now carried weight, a presence. As she neared the clearing, her flashlight flickered, then went out. She tapped it. Nothing. Total darkness. But even in that thick black, she knew exactly where she was. And then the clearing lit up, not from her flashlight, but from them. They descended slowly, like glowing petals falling through water. The orbs, 8 now, formed a perfect circle above the charred earth, hovering silently. Ellie stood in the center. One orb lowered. Closer. Closer. Until it was only a few feet from her chest. She raised a hand, tentatively, and this time she touched it. Her fingers met not heat, not glass, but energy, like static and warmth and pressure all at once. It wasn't solid, it wasn't liquid, it simply was. And then the world dropped away. No sound, no light, no ground, just a blinding whiteness and the sensation of floating. Ellie was nowhere, and yet not alone. She felt it before she saw it, a presence folding around her, vast and incomprehensible, like standing at the edge of a massive intelligence that stretched beyond stars. She couldn't see it, not with her eyes, but she knew it was there, observing, measuring. Then, without warning, images flooded her mind, rushing in like a tidal wave, a swirling galaxy collapsing inward, a barren planet with metal towers stretching into a red sky. Thousands of people floating in long, crystalline chambers. Eyes closed, mouths open. Pine Hollow, lit from above, with glowing lines of energy spiraling beneath the soil. Ellie gasped, but no sound escaped her lips. A voice, not from the outside but inside her head, spoke again. We observe, we collect. You are aware. You are not meant to be. Ellie wanted to scream, to ask 1,000 questions, but her thoughts felt weightless, scattered. Why us? She finally managed to think. The presence pulsed. The lights around her dimmed, then flared. Many sights, many trials. You remain. You adapt. Others do not. You are different. Ellie didn't know what that meant. She didn't want to be different. But she understood now. Pine Hollow wasn't random. It had been chosen, observed, cultivated, an experiment, and she had been tagged. Suddenly, everything went dark. The floating sensation stopped. Ellie collapsed onto the grass of the clearing, gasping, her body heavy and aching. The lights were gone. The orbs had vanished. Only the stars remained, silent, cold, uncaring. She sat up slowly, her body trembling. In her hand was the Polaroid camera. One picture had developed on its own. She turned it over. It showed a blurry image of herself, standing in the clearing, surrounded by 7 glowing lights. Her eyes were glowing white. She didn't remember the photo being taken, and in the bottom corner, faint and shaky, was a message written in red ink. You've seen too much. Ellie staggered to her feet, heart pounding. She had made contact. And now, she wasn't sure if she had been chosen or marked. The sun was rising when Ellie stumbled back through the trees, the light brittle and pale like a bone picked clean. Birds were beginning to sing again, tentatively, as if testing the air. For a moment, Pine Hollow looked the same. But Ellie wasn't the same. Her legs were trembling. Her hands were numb. Her throat felt dry, like it had been filled with dust. But her mind was screaming. The words echoed in her skull. You are not meant to be. You are different. You've seen too much. She had touched something not of this world, felt it, heard it inside her bones. And now it was inside her. Not physically, no, not in a way anyone could see, but something had shifted, like a compass needle pulled toward a hidden magnetic force. Ben was waiting for her on her porch. He stood as soon as she came into view, his face pale with worry. Thought they got you, he said, rushing to help her up the steps. They did, she whispered. Sort of. Inside, she told him everything. The lights, the floating, the voice, the images, the vision of people suspended in chambers like they were waiting for something, or being preserved. Ben listened in silence, his fingers clenching tighter as she, Hux, spoke. They've been watching this town for years, Ellie said. We're part of something big. We were chosen. Ben nodded slowly. Or trapped. Ellie looked down at the photo in her hand. The Polaroid she hadn't taken. The one with her glowing eyes. That part still didn't make sense. She hadn't remembered any camera flash. She hadn't pressed the shutter. Yet, there it was, and the red ink at the bottom. You've seen too much. I need to know what's underneath this town, she said. Literally. Ben's brows furrowed. What do you mean? She unfolded. The attic map again. The energy lines. The landing sites. They're not random. And those visions, they showed something underground. Machinery. Chambers. Watching us. You think there's a facility beneath Pine Hollow? I think there's more than one. And I think we're standing on top of one right now. That same day, they packed food, water, flashlights, rope, and a crowbar. Ben brought bolt cutters. Ellie brought a hammer. And they went searching. For hours, they scoured the woods, cross-referencing the map with landmarks, trees, elevation, patches of scorched earth. The forest was a maze, but the symbols on the parchment eventually led them to a place they'd never noticed before. A slope near the southern edge of town where the trees grew too straight, too evenly spaced, like they had been planted for camouflage. Ben was the first to see it. Ellie. Over here, half buried beneath decades of leaves and soil, was a rusted metal hatch. Circular, sealed tight with a wheel lock handle. It looked like something out of a fallout shelter. A government relic, but it hummed. Ellie crouched beside it and pressed, her hand to the metal. Warm. They stared at each other. Whatever's down there, it's not abandoned, Ben said. With effort, they broke the lock, turned the wheel, and pulled the hatch open. A rush of cold, sterile air spilled out, thick with the scent of dust and electricity. A staircase descended into darkness. No signs. No warnings. Just silence. They entered. The stairwell spiraled down longer than expected. Concrete walls lined with rusted pipes and exposed wires. Ellie counted the steps. 60. Then 80. Then 100. The deeper they went, the colder it became. At the bottom, a wide steel door stood half open, its hinges bent as though forced from the inside. Beyond it was a corridor. Lights flickered dimly overhead, and the walls were lined with smooth black panels that hummed with faint energy. The place wasn't ruined. It was functioning. Ben, what is this? Ellie whispered. He shook his head, stunned. As they crept forward, the hallway widened into a large circular chamber, easily the size of a gymnasium, and in its center stood them. Pods. Dozens of them. Tall glass tubes, filled with thick bluish fluid. Inside each one floated a figure, motionless, eyes closed, suspended in a way that looked too still to be sleep. People. Ben stumbled backward. Oh my God, he whispered. It's them. It's the missing people. Ellie stepped closer. One of the pods held Mrs. Whitaker. Her hair floated around her face like seaweed. Her eyes flicked behind her lids. Dreaming. Or remembering. Another pod held the paper boy. And further down, Mr. Leone, all accounted for, all here, alive, but taken. I think this is a collection, Ellie said, her voice trembling. They didn't kill them. They preserved them, studying them, storing them. For what? Ben asked. A monitor on the wall lit up suddenly, displaying a series of symbols. Then it flickered to a video feed. Live footage of Pine Hollow streets. Ellie's house. The diner. The school. Someone, or something, was watching the entire town from down here. She turned to another console and began flipping switches. A panel slid open in the floor. A second hatch. "Another level," she whispered. They hesitated, and then descended again. The lower chamber was darker, quieter. The machines here were different, less mechanical, more organic. The walls were made of a strange material that pulsed faintly like breathing skin. The air was warmer, almost humid, and in the center of the room stood a single chair, sleek, metallic, with thin tendrils snaking up from its base, hanging in the air like waiting fingers. It wasn't built for observation. It was built for communication. Ellie approached it. Slowly, almost drawn, the same voice from her dream returned. "You've opened the door." Ben backed away, eyes wide. "Ellie, don't—" But it was too late. The moment her fingers brushed the armrest, the lights flared, and everything changed. She saw the history of Pine Hollow flickering like a slideshow behind her eyes. Images burned into her vision. Ships descending in the woods, agents in suits, a cover-up that spanned generations. Every mayor, every sheriff, complicit or erased. This wasn't the first experiment, it was just the only one still standing. And now, they had made contact, not by accident, by design. Because Ellie wasn't a random observer, she was the final test. The town woke with the morning, the way it always did, sleepy and soft, like a fog that hadn't yet realized it should lift. Birds sang again. Wind moved through the trees. The sun filtered through the mist with quiet confidence, warming the sidewalks and the rooftops of Pine Hollow. To anyone looking, it was an ordinary day. But beneath the surface, things had changed. Ellie sat on her front porch, the same mug of coffee growing cold in her hands, the same chipped paint on the railings, the same ivy curling up the post. But the stillness was different now, not peaceful, calm before something. She hadn't slept since the night before, the night she and Ben had discovered the truth, the night she sat in that strange alien chair and had her mind opened. She remembered everything, more than she wanted, too, and since then, something inside her had gone quiet. Still, Ben hadn't returned with her. He stayed behind, said he had to know more, said if this place was a bridge between worlds, someone needed to stand on it. He promised he'd come back. But the hatch sealed behind him, and the hum stopped. Ellie had waited for hours. Nothing. Now, she was the only one left above. The only one who knew. She looked out over the town. Everything seemed the same, but she knew it wasn't. She could feel it, a subtle frequency beneath her skin, like her bones were tuned to a signal that no one else could hear. And every night at 9:03 p.m., the lights returned. They no longer hovered or circled or danced across the sky. They simply watched. Silent. Steady. 5 of them, always in formation, always above the woods. No one else in town seemed to notice. Or maybe they did, and chose not to see. Just like before. Just like always. She wondered if the others were still, down there, in those pods, floating in their frozen dreams. She wondered if they aged, if they breathed, if they dreamed of Pine Hollow the way it once was. She wondered if she was next. The Polaroid sat beside her on the porch table, weathered from the cold. Her own glowing-eyed reflection stared back at her, frozen in time. The red ink at the bottom had started to smudge from morning dew. "You've seen too much." She stared at it now without fear. There was no turning back. The map from the attic had been burned, the metal hatch over the underground chamber buried, beneath rock and soil. If someone came looking, they'd find nothing. But the presence was still here, watching, waiting. She had tried to warn people. She had written letters, sent copies of the photo, filed anonymous reports. Most went ignored. One came back in a plain envelope, unsigned with only 3 words written across the page. Let it happen. Now, she sat each night with a notebook in her lap and a pencil in her hand, writing down the patterns of the lights, drawing the symbols she remembered from the tunnels, the language that spoke to her, even now, in dreams and in whispers. She didn't know what she would do with it all. She only knew she couldn't stop. Not now. The truth was too large, too deep, and it had eyes. That evening, as the clock ticked past 9:02 p.m., Ellie leaned forward in her chair. The lights blinked into view. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each one perfectly round, perfectly still. A breeze lifted the edge of her notebook. The pencil rolled and stopped at the edge of the page. The lights didn't move, but she could feel them. Not looking at her. Looking through her. And deep inside, somewhere beneath the noise of thought, a whisper stirred again. It begins. Ellie stood slowly. This time, she didn't look away. She watched them, and somewhere far above the stars, they watched her too. If you love suspense, mystery, and terrifying close encounters, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. Share it with your friends who can't get enough of UFOs and unsolved disappearances. And whatever you do, keep watching the sky.